And magic tells a story. Even if we don't think we're telling a story, we're still telling a story. Even if a person just does a magic trick, well, that's a story about a person just doing a magic trick. Mm-hmm. And I learned early on in my career that in order to really go deeper into the art of magic, I had to learn the art of storytelling and acting. And some of the best magicians in the world have explored that area. David Copperfield, who is arguably the most successful magician in the history of planet Earth, what set him apart from other magicians is the storyline, the drama, the comedy, the emotional impact, the connection. There was characters in his numbers, the early vignettes that he would do. And still today in Las Vegas, David Copperfield is on stage as a storyteller, telling stories about his family, his father, toys he had when he was a child, things that move him emotionally. If you watch a David Copperfield show these days, it's very much like watching a Steven Spielberg movie. You're looking at Close Encounters of a Third Kind when you see the giant spaceship appear. You're looking at Jurassic Park when you see the giant dinosaur, Tyrannosaurus, appear. He is inspired because of his background in musical theater and drama and cinema. Those are his inspirations. And I grew up watching David Copperfield, and he's a friend of mine, and I get to spend a lot of time with him in Las Vegas. And it's the storyteller that is the master magician. When you see Penn and Teller, they're telling stories, personal stories, political stories, humorous stories, serious stories, dramatic stories, but each piece that they create in their show has a story. It's much more than a trick. Each piece has elements of theater. If you look at Teller from Penn and Teller, not only is he doing the television show Fool Us, but they're also doing shows every night in Las Vegas. And then he flies to Chicago to he's working on Macbeth, and he did Shakespeare's Tempest. So he's working on reinterpreting the greatest storytellers in the theater with incorporating his vision and his magic. So I think magicians, more than being technical, are storytellers. And I'll give you an example. If you look at, I was at FISM in Beijing, the magic competition, and there was great manipulators. And there was, from Hungary, Soma, the Hungarian Manipulation Act. Mm-hmm. And why he won first place is because his show told a story of a man coming in from nature. You hear the birds and the trees, and then he comes into the city, and there's technology overwhelms him, the phones and the coins and and then at the end he gets to go home, and his little suitcase friend and the newspaper comes back together, and then you hear the bird noises and you realize he's outside of the city again and completing the circle of being able to become a master of his own sanity and cutting through the technology with his magic. And that's why he won instead of manipulators that just produce cards. Produce billiard. Why? Well, it's the story of a very talented young person doing manipulation. But people want deeper stories, I think, especially with magic. It's both. I think where there's three levels of learning: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. When you're a young magician, you have to learn the different effects and the different methods and all of the different elements that make magic. Then you have a capability to go out there and actually perform magic as a generic magician. And then after that, innovation. Because I think it's the same with a piano player. I mean, you just don't go innovate. You have to learn the notes. You have to learn something about the piano. And you have to learn the notes and then melodies and then harmonies, and then you can compose your own original. But I think, and Eugene Berger was very much involved in a big conversation with originality and innovation versus imitation. And I think magicians kind of have to imitate first before they innovate. I think many magicians don't work with a teacher, and they get very sloppy technique, and they make excuses that they don't want to learn the old ways. Well, there's a lot to be learned from learning the techniques and learning the history of magic as a way to make a positive progression towards creativity and innovation and making your magic unique. I think you have to learn the rules, play by the rules, and then break the rules, not just break the rules. I think you have to learn good formulas, like a cook needs to learn recipes before they innovate new things. You just don't go throw contents in a pan and hope for a great meal. You have to learn the techniques. You have to learn baking, and you have to learn how to, prepare different foods and then combine them together. And that's the same thing about learning scripting, learning technique, learning movement, learning drama, learning audience management techniques. All of these things go into magic. But now there's so much attention, like, oh, I'm just going to take a trick and put it on my Instagram. And I'm not going to add anything to it because I just want to get hits and likes and subscribers. Well, Lance Burton says 1 million hits on YouTube doesn't make you a good magician. 1 million hits makes you a celebrity, makes you famous, but it doesn't make you a good magician. Good magicians are spending more time practicing than putting up crap on Instagram.
Yeah, indeed.
So that's, spend more time learning your technique, learning your history, and you become a great magician. The best magicians are the ones that practice the most and do the most shows. And those are the ones that are also innovating. And those are people like David Blaine. Those are people like Penn and Teller. Those are people like David Copperfield that are doing the shows, but they know their history. They know their craft. They know the theater of magic. They're not just trying to just take tricks and throw them at their audience. And that's why there's a lot of people that are kind of flash in the pan, especially on the internet today, that are just trying to get famous by throwing magic at the public.
Yeah.
To boost your creativity, you have to look outside of magic. You have to look to cinema, to live theater, to art, to music. That's, again, I go back to David Copperfield and Penn and Teller. They're at the top of their game. They're doing more television shows and more magic shows than anyone in the world. People seem to like it. They're getting lots of money for it. And they're looking outside of magic. Also, let's say Penn and Teller look to politics. They look to pop culture. They look towards things that inspire them, like Teller looks to Shakespeare to inspire him. David Copperfield studies cinema. And his magic is very influenced by cinema. You look at David Blaine, he's looking outside of magic into more of these techniques of the fakir, of the austerities of people that walk the edge of doing things to their body that are, he's a survival artist doing, being in ice and starvation and sewing his lips and regurgitation. These are not things that are in the center of mainstream magic. They're at the fringes of magic. They're on the outside edges of magic. And places where the outside edges blur are lands like India, where there is conjuring, and then there are kind of these holy austerities of being buried alive, of holding your hand up for 4 years, of not cutting your hair, of not eating for weeks on end, those are areas that alternative performance artists like David Blaine are looking into. So if you want to be a great magician, I think you have to study the deep history of magic, but then broaden your horizon and look at culture and art in general.